I'm so excited to have you all here today for our workshop with my dear, lovely friend, the amazing writing instructor and writer and multimedia artist, Janelle Hardy. Say hello, Janelle.
Hi.
I'm
It's
going to
always
pass this
interesting
on.
hearing how people describe you.
That's a very abbreviated version of a long resume, an impressive resume.
Yeah. Um, wow, we've got a good group of people. I do love knowing where you are in the world. So we'll just give it another minute and then dive into this very full workshop. But please share where you are in the world. And if you are on colonized land, share whose Indigenous people's land you're on as well. Normally, I live in
On the bottom
Vancouver,
left,
BC, Canada, and
please,
please also mute yourselves.
under the red back.
I'm going to help
Oopsie,
you with that.
sorry.
There we go.
Um,
Larry, California.
why are so many people unmuted? That's a puzzle. You know what I'm gonna do? I'm just gonna, oh yeah, mute.
Mute. There we go. Oh, now I can't hear you, Janelle.
Oh my goodness. Okay. You would think, you know what's funny? The more I've presented online, the less polished I get.
That's not true.
I embrace it.
Yeah.
What I was trying to say was I was living in Vancouver, BC on Coast Salish People's Land. I am from the Yukon Territory of Canada, which is the far northwest, and I grew up on Tonquachon and Kwalindun People's Land. Right now I'm living in France, and
Mhm.
that's a pretty fun new experience. So let me take a peek at the chat section. Panama. Lots of Americans and Canadians.
London, Phoenix,
Hmm.
couple from London.
Portugal.
Ooh, Cape Cod, where I honeymooned.
Woo woo.
Did you know that, Janelle?
Nope, I didn't. Learning new things. This is a memoir outlining process, so I bet I'll learn even more. Okay, let's get started. Okay, got my slide deck forward and this is including Q&A. This is between 2 to 2.5 hours, just so you know. And if you have to leave early, that's fine. Because I'll be sending out the replay and you get 6 days to watch the replay. But if you can stay for the full amount of time, you won't regret it because you'll feel so refreshed and full of ideas. I have to stop talking because I can't click buttons and talk at the same time. There we go. So, welcome to this workshop called Outline Your Memoir Using Fairy Tales and Myth as Your Guide. I hope you all got the preparatory emails. If you signed up last minute or you didn't do the homework in those emails, don't worry. When we get to the fairy tale part of this workshop, I will offer a workaround. The other thing that can happen is people get stuck deciding. Either they feel they're not familiar with ancient tales and can't pick one, or they like too many and can't decide. So I will help you with that once we get to that point. This workshop will still work for you. So I'm Janelle. I'm the creator and teacher of the Art of Personal Mythmaking, which is a transformational memoir writing course. I'm a lifelong writer, a lover of fairy tales, and really importantly to all of my work, I'm a body-based somatic healing therapist. So I always bring in healing and the body into all of my teaching around writing and creativity. So this is also a hands-on and productive workshop. I really recommend you have paper and writing implements. If possible, a roll of paper like was suggested in my email, but if not that, then pieces of paper that you can put side by side will work just fine. And if not that and computer is the way you work, I'm sure you'll make this work. We're going to cover today Where some of the memoir writing blocks show up that make it difficult to start or write your memoir, some of my story and how I've developed this uniquely body-based and healing memoir writing process, and why it includes fairy tale and myth, and how it can help you on your writing and healing journey. And then the workshop itself, where we go through this unique process of outlining your memoir. So to get the most out of this workshop, I really recommend you give yourself space to fully engage without distractions. Some ways to do that I recommend are putting your phone in airplane or work mode, closing internet browser tabs that are super tempting, turning off notifications where you can. This is always when I double check my own phone to make sure I've done that. And if you have a lot of people that pull on your attention all the time, closing a door and asking them to leave you alone can be helpful too. Whoop. Okay. So you actually don't have to have downloaded the rites of passage document, but I just want to reference that. There's a link to it in the emails that were sent to you. And you're also going to go through it in this presentation with myself. You'll want to refer back to that document after this workshop. The paper I already mentioned and the ancient tale. So let's start with the first interactive question. Don't type it in the chat yet, please. Actually, another note. It is really important that you know that if you send me a private message in the chat section, I will not see it. So just so you know now, it will not be seen because I'll be too busy presenting. The best way to get in touch with me is through email. And if you have questions, pop them publicly into the chat. Nicole will be tracking the chat section, or save them till the end when we get to the Q&A section. So what makes you interested in writing your memoir or your next memoir? Okay, I'm going to give you about a minute to consider that. And if you want, you can share it in the chat section. So some responses: curiosity, a full life, so much has happened, to focus my thoughts and realize the lessons of my life. I believe my memoir has valuable lessons for women and girls in today's negative environment. I want to use it as a tool for healing and reflection, as well as sharing it with others who may have experienced similar. I believe I have an odd perspective on life. Storytelling of any kind has always drawn me in. Telling my story feels like a gift of self-compassion. Yes. Writing my memoir will help me discover new things about my story. I want to share it with others. Thank you, everyone. I won't be able to get through all of these responses, but please know I do read them after the workshop is done. So oops, hang on. Whoops. What am I doing? Okay, does this sound like you? You want to be able to write your memoirs without overwhelm, procrastination, and writer's block. And you have a feeling that memoir writing is more than just writing. In fact, you know it's also about healing, which is both exciting and overwhelming. You've probably tried to work with your life stories writing all alone, but it hasn't really worked. That's because we need community. We're social creatures. We need each other. There's no shame in that. Or maybe you've written a lot of your life story down, but you're having trouble organizing and making sense of it. This is a big challenge for a lot of my students. You wish you could just get some support and have fun with it too. And so all of you are here because you want to write a memoir. So let's talk about why you haven't started yet, or if you've started, where are you stuck? And I'm going to give you about a minute for this too. Don't add your answers until I add the little divider though, please. Why haven't you started yet? Or where are you stuck? There we go. So a minute to consider these questions. And I invite us to share these in the chat section because often people feel alone in these challenges, but they're very shared. So some of the responses: perfectionism, self-doubt, and fear, stuck with getting started and sticking to a routine. Afraid of re-traumatizing myself through painful memories. I'm learning to ... my fourth quarter. Too many disparate sections, how to link or separate into separate additional stories. What to leave out. Have addressed a couple of things into anthologies is all I've done. Want to make it more creative. Mainly, I think my life is not so interesting. My craft isn't good enough to do my family story on the page. Too much material, very unwieldy. So you can see there's a really wide range of reasons why folks are getting stuck. So the next question, again, don't respond to this until I put the divider in the chat section. And oops. I'm gonna ask you, these are two questions. What's most exciting about writing your memoir, and what's your biggest fear about writing your memoir? And I want you to slow down and put the excitement and the fear in the same post because they go together, and I'll explain why. What's most exciting and what's most scary about writing your memoir? So I'll give you a minute for this one. And please put them both in the same statement. You can also consider, where does the excitement and the fear live in your body? Okay, you guys, put the excitement and the fear together. This is important. All right, so some responses. Most exciting is the prospect of being heard, and the fear is that no one will care. Excitement, alignment with universal purpose for being, fear, hurting others. Excitement, having my story be heard, fear, judgment from others reading. Excitement, I'm loving it. Fear, afraid of offending the difficult sister. Excitement, getting my book published. Fear, what will people think? Okay, so the reason I really want these two to exist side by side is that when your fear comes up, which can really shut you down, if you also know and hold your excitement beside it, you can lean into the excitement to help you move through the fear, right? So the fear starts to shut you down. You're like, but remember the excitement. Oh yes, telling my story. Bring some of that in to renegotiate the fear so that you don't just shut down all the time or go off in a different direction. Okay, so what you'll learn and do today: how to outline your memoir using your favorite ancient tale as your guide. We are going to go through this step by step, and the first step we're going to start with is your fairy tale timeline. And what I want you to do is just let this be a little bit confusing. I am not taking us in a linear process, but everything will come together at the end of this workshop. So we're going to start with the fairy tale timeline of your chosen ancient tale because it will reveal archetypal narrative arcs and symbols, which will help you identify patterns in your personal stories and deep psyche, but you are going to not analyze at first. Then we're going to move into working with the rites of passage document, and you'll work through this document of possible human experiences because it'll reveal memoir ideas and surface stories for you, which will help you continue to identify patterns in your personal stories and your deep psyche, and it'll give you a ton of writing prompts that you can use outside of this workshop. Then finally, we're gonna dive into your life story timeline, or start it. You won't have time to do the whole thing, but you're gonna do a valiant effort at starting it or improving it if you've already been working on it, because it really helps to lay out your experiences in a linear fashion in a timeline, even though memoir is very rarely linear, but we're creating a master document that is easy to reference. So we're going to follow a linear fashion. And this will really help you identify eras of your life that you want to work with, as well as, again, spot themes in your personal stories and your deep psyche. This is the personal myth making part of this work. Finally, we'll integrate the two timelines and do some pattern spotting, which will give you symbolic and sometimes literal clues, which is going to help you decide which of your many life stories you want to work on, because you can't write all your stories in one memoir. And at the end of the workshop, I'll share more about my transformational and body-centric memoir writing course, The Art of Personal Myth-Making, which will help you continue to write your memoir, heal through the process, and receive support as you go. I'll give you a sneak peek into the course itself and some time-sensitive bonuses, like a great discount, and we'll make time for a Q&A on what you learned today. I already said that. Okay. But before we continue, I'm going to share a little bit about how I got here, how we learned all of this, why my perspective is the way it is, so that you know that I'm trustworthy and have the skills I'm about to teach you. When I was around 7, actually, let me back up. I also want to invite you to just follow this mini bio of mine as a narrative arc. And you can notice the choices I'm making around what I'm sharing with you for the purposes of this workshop, because that's really what memoir is about, is very intentional choices around what we share and what we don't for specific purposes. So you can take this as getting to know me, but also exploring choices I made to support you in feeling supported. So around the age of 7, I asked for a typewriter for my birthday. Some part of me knew before I really knew that writing was my path, and typewriters are very cool. They're very tactile, which is a real thing with using our body in the creative arts. They're so tactile. They require pressure and touch and sound. There's a little bit of magic to typewriters. From about the age of 6 to 11, I was always reading, curled up in armchairs, stretched out on the floor on my stomach, devouring fairy tale books, fantasy books, young adult adventure books, scouring bookshelves. But then from about the age of 12 to 27, I started to freeze up. And I'm using nervous system language here, the fight, flight, freeze vocabulary. I started to freeze up. I developed chronic fatigue. I struggled with a kind of immobilizing purple blush shyness, by which I mean my face would go purple. I'd start to blush. That was deeply embarrassing. It would really freeze me up and shut me down. So as part of this, I really stopped speaking my truth and I started doubting myself. And because of that, I also became very creatively blocked. All of my creative visions got stuck in my head. It was very hard to get them out into the world, which if you're a creative person, you know how painful that is. And so that discomfort and unhappiness and stuckness really pushed me to seek out healing, which is one of the best gifts I got in my life, was that I was unhappy and I wanted to be free of these states. I had creative adventures anyways. It's just that the beforehand inertia was so intense. It took so much energy to push through and get the creative flow flowing. A couple times where it happened without a lot of effort was when my dad was dying of cancer, because it was a wake-up call. But I was always struggling with this default towards freezing up and shutting down. I imagine that you can relate to some of what I just shared and will share. Maybe not the specifics, but the challenges of navigating and negotiating with how we inherit patterns and character traits, ancestral and multi-generational and cultural, that get in the way of feeling free. From about the age of 17 to 23, I immersed myself cross-culturally in homestays with Japanese, with Russian and Jamaican Canadian families. I learned the Japanese and Russian languages, and I studied anthropology and dance. I was really fascinated by culture. So you could say I became an apprentice to culture and how it's transmitted through dance, body language, verbal language, and especially through stories like fairy tales. And because I was still stuck, feeling stuck, I started seeking out healing. I received the Structural Integration Series. This is more commonly known as Rolfing. And I discovered the world of body-based hands-on healing, the somatic world. This started to transform me. I didn't know I could be free of mental and emotional restrictions by following my body's lead, but there I was discovering that. So I decided I wanted to be a practitioner, and at 27, I became a practitioner, which means I became an apprentice to people's life stories, their bodies, and their body wisdom. And since 2011, I've taken hundreds of people, maybe thousands by now, through an 11-session trauma-informed transformational healing process, which I still do part-time to keep myself connected to the foundation of my work, which is people's bodies and their stories. In my 20s and my 30s, I continued to be a practicing artist in writing, painting, and dance. And because of that, I became really intimate with all things creativity and the creative process, as well as all things mindset and resistance, including writer's block. I experienced heartbreak and challenges. During that time, I also became a single mother, self-employed, married, divorced, and watched my father die from leukemia. These experiences forced me to seek out support and healing over and over again, and to find a way to make meaning of my life. I imagine, again, that you can relate, because my experiences are human challenges, and the pain is often the catalyst that helps us to make meaning of our lives. So I don't think pain is a bad thing necessarily. I think it's what we do with it, what we do with this suffering and this discomfort, that's the more important thing. So because of all those experiences, I started to notice the connections between creativity, resistance, creative block, and stuckness, between the body and its nervous system, our life stories and our need for healing support, and cultural stories, medicine stories like fairy tale and myth, and how deeply helpful they are. All of this came together into the art of personal myth making, which is my transformational memoir writing course. And this workshop is the foundational workshop to that course. This is how we start. Now and in the future, the learning doesn't end for me, and I feel it's important as a healing and writing teacher to share my commitments to my own growth, because that's of benefit to you. Which it means that I do annual continuing education in somatic healing work. I'm a couple months away from finishing my somatic experiencing practitioner training, which is all about trauma healing through the nervous system. And I use all those tools in my writing teaching. It makes writing prompts pretty great, as well as ongoing courses in fairy tale analysis, storytelling, women's leadership, and support for myself, which includes bodywork, weight training, therapy, and dancing. So from the perspective of my own life experiences, as well as now having taught memoir writing and healing for over, somewhere between 6 to 8 years, memoir writing is meaning making. That's what we're doing. Memoir writing is also very, very healing. And memoir writing using our bodies and fairy tales is also magical and fun. So that's what we're going to do. But before we dive into the first fairy tale timeline, I want to just talk a little bit about what exactly is memoir and how is it different from biography, autobiography, personal history, etc. There's a lot of different terms for writing about your personal stories. And I take a bit of a loose definition, but in terms of considering that the form that memoir takes can be really wide ranging, and it just does not have to be a full-length book traditionally published. having said that, these are some of my examples because they're easy to find on the internet. But what I want to point out with some of these examples on the slide is that they are oriented around a very distinct theme. So, for example, Men We Reaped, a memoir by Jasmine Ward. She is a Black American writer, and she wrote her memoir oriented around the 5 young men in her life that died in a very short time frame. One was her brother, and the others were in her neighborhood. So she created the structure of a theme of the loss of these 5 young men to explore her own life and the context of her life inside of her family, her community, and her country. You can see that when you have such a clear theme, it's the tool of discernment through which you decide which stories are going to enter that memoir and which stories get set aside for your second or third memoir. Another example, Sick, a memoir by Porochista Kakpour. She's an Iranian American journalist, and she became very sick. And so her memoir is all about the experience of being sick in the States. Educated is another kind of easy example, very famous, by Tara Westover, who didn't get a formal education until she entered university. She was so-called homeschooled, but when you read the book, you discover there wasn't a lot of educating happening at home. And her intense drive and curiosity and hunger to learn and extricate herself from a really quite a dramatic childhood in order to become educated is what the memoir is about. Something else I want to point out is how you can be a serial memoirist. Dani Shapiro is a Jewish American writer who is a great example of this. I think I should update this because she actually has 5 memoirs now, I believe. But because a memoir is oriented so clearly around a theme, you can revisit the same time frame and same stories from these different perspectives and create really compelling stories over and over. So, for example, Devotion, a memoir, is about her search with her husband when her son was young to find a synagogue near her small town and return to her faith after having really rejected the Orthodox Judaism that her father practiced. Hourglass is a memoir about being in a long-term marriage and wanting to stay in a long-term marriage. And how do you write about that and write about the experience? This one, Inheritance, a memoir of genealogy, paternity, and love, was a real bestseller and turned into a podcast that she does as well. And the genesis of that memoir was in her early 50s when she took a DNA test on a whim and learned that her father was not her biological father, which triggered this whole investigation into what does it mean, genealogy, paternity, and love. So that's really fun. That's what I want to emphasize. How fun that we get to pick and choose. No one gets to decide that but you. And this workshop, I'm going to really support you in unearthing some themes that you might not be aware of, or you might just get more clarity through this workshop. So you can really feel solid in knowing how to deal with a massive volume of experiences that you can't write all of them, right? So you'll have this discerning structure with which to go forth in writing your memoir. Another really cool example I want to point out, and this is where we kind of waver past the borders of, is it memoir, is it not? Jeanette Walls is an American journalist who wrote The Glass Castle, which also got turned into a movie about her very dramatic childhood with parents who made very different choices and had mental illness without a lot of support. and she grew up in a lot of poverty. She's a beautiful writer. She got really curious in writing The Glass Castle about her maternal grandmother, who she didn't have a lot of connection with because her mother, the daughter of the grandmother, kept them kind of separate from the grandparents. And so then she went and she wrote a true life novel, is what she calls it. I would say it's a family memoir, a researched family memoir called Half Broke Horses, all about her grandmother's life. She did a lot of research and conversation and then constructed this extraordinarily beautiful imagining of her maternal grandmother's life, which then informs an understanding of the glass castle and her mother's choices. So that's a fun option too. And there's other ideas like speculative memoir, where you really bring in the fantastical and the mythic elements explicitly. Okay, but let's move on to the first experiential part of this, which is the fairy tale timeline. So, why fairy tales? I like to call these stories ancient tales, fairy tale, folklore, myth, um, because what I'm really referring to are stories that come out of oral history traditions and that are much older than us. These are stories, some of which are thousands of years old and have been passed on and told and retold throughout all of those eras. So these are stories that have a life of their own. They carry such value that they keep coexisting with us. So ancient tales like this contain narrative arcs and archetypal forces that we resonate with, and that means they have teachings for us. They on many different levels. Um, so, working with ancient tales in this era where we have lost a lot of our family and cultural practices of telling stories means that we often have to access the stories by looking them up in written form, which kind of freezes them in time. So we start to work with these ancient tales by reading different versions of them to try to approximate the oral history tradition. Um, by exploring their deeper symbolic meanings, and also by being really aware that when we're taking in these stories that were written down, it's important to consider who the story collectors were and whether they had certain agendas. Not all story collectors were trained in the art of just putting it down as told and had patriarchal or religious agendas and moralizing agendas, and sometimes change the stories to suit the ethos of their era. So it's also useful to ask what got left out and re-envision accordingly. So we're almost at the practical part of this step. Things that belong on the timeline of your fairy tale timeline are the story from start to finish. I'm going to show you an example, don't worry. Pivotal moments, characters, action, colors, and details. Anything you remember about the story. I'll really encourage you to go from memory first before you Google the story. Because what we remember actually provides a lot of clues for us. What we remember versus what we find in the story when we look it up will point us in some interesting directions. So start with memory, then look the story up. Include anything you like and don't like in the story. Make little notes about it. Any intuitive hits and sensory details that come up, even if they don't make sense. So here is an example. This is pretty, so don't let this deter you. Yours is going to be handmade, and that's awesome. I use Cinderella as an example. Now, if anyone chose Cinderella, please go by your memory first, not by how I've laid it out from my memory. So what I like to do with these timelines is start by dividing it in half through the middle, and you can see now why a roll of paper is useful, or laying out paper side by side. So So I divide it in half, and then I decide what theme is going to go above the midline and what theme is going to go below the midline. For this story, I decided the happier, more uplifting moments would rise above the midline, and the tougher moments would go below. This is kind of a classic visual way that we understand stories, anyways. And then you can see there's this visual pattern based on that, ups and downs, and then whoa, up to the happy ending. Then what I did with these yellow circles, I just added in all the obvious elements of the story as I remembered them first. After that, because I like visual arts and the visual, and I was using Canva, I put in pictures that illustrated the moments. And then after that, I put in these little post-it notes where I was putting in themes and questions and curiosity that I had, right? So Cinderella, we start with an intact family, loving and happy. Then the mom dies. So obviously there's loss and there's grief, and a change in circumstances. Dad remarries to this stepmother, and he's gone with work a lot, and the stepmother and the stepsisters are cruel. So there's a tremendous change of circumstances for Cinderella, lovelessness, etc. So you get the picture. Now, what I want is for anyone who's ready to go to get started, and I'm just going to check in and see if anyone needs a workaround. So just unmute yourself if you need some help choosing a story or you have a question, or you can pop it in the chat. Vivian, please unmute yourself. I can't hear anyone. Okay, well, let's go to Suzanne next. Suzanne, I can't hear you. You need, now you're unmuted. Now you're muted, Suzanne. Let's go to Susan.
They're saying they can't unmute Janelle in the
Oh,
chat.
okay. That's strange, but okay. Susan with two N's. I just clicked the ask to unmute button. There we
All
go.
right, now it works. Okay, hi Janelle, hi everybody. So usually your fairy tales are such that they start with an intact world, then there is a big event, and then there is, in this case, most cases, loss or.
What's your question, though?
So the question is, so what if you have a fairy tale that doesn't follow that scheme?
Yeah, it doesn't have to follow a scheme. Just put the story down for the timeline.
Okay, so I've put that story down on my paper, but then how am I going to emulate the process that you are going to follow?
I'm not sure what you mean. The process right now is just to get the whole story down on a timeline.
Okay, thank you.
Great. And we'll get to next steps after the personal life story timeline, but we're not diving into analysis yet. We're just diving into getting the story elements down on paper and diving into your curiosity about the story and the different moments in the story. What's really important for everyone to pay attention to is try not to analyze and try not to make it approximate your life. This is not about a literal parallel narrative arc. It's just about working with a story that you resonate with. Okay, let's move to Susan next.
Hi. How old does the story have to be? Because I really gravitate towards Alice in Wonderland, and that's really not very old.
Yeah, that's a literary story. That's a story invented by one person. So it doesn't qualify as an ancient tale, even though it's entered the popular imagination. And So if that's the only story you can think of to work with, then work with it. But generally, what I ask is if there's a story that comes out of collective creation and telling, to go with that first.
Is there a list of stories somewhere?
Well, there isn't time to research right now, but yes, there was a list provided in the email, so you'll be able to reference that after. In the meantime, just work with Alice in Wonderland for this exercise. You'll still get something out of it.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, so about 13 minutes from now, you have to work on this timeline. If you finish before the time is up, feel free to Google the story and keep adding to the timeline, keep adding curiosity and impressions. Have about 2 minutes left.
Janelle, can you flip the slide over to the graphic? Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you everyone for diving into this, despite it maybe not making perfect sense yet. It will start to come together, I promise. There's a method to this. We're going to move on now to the rites of passage document. You don't need the document because I have it laid out on the slides, but if you did have a chance to print it out, you might want to pull it out now, and because you'll be able to circle it as we go through. What I'm going to do with this document is I'm going to slowly read through it. And there's a reason for that. We're very visually oriented and we use our eyes so much these days. We take in video, we take in words, we take in information almost exclusively through our eyes. And when we prioritize a sense so heavily, we lose the opportunity to receive information about the same thing when it's taken in by other senses. So by me reading this aloud, as you're also able to read it with me on the screen or on the paper, you're going to have the information and the concepts land in yourself, in your body, your psyche, your nervous system, with just a little extra layer. So what I'll encourage you to do is be ready to note down the things that resonate, that are either a direct lived experience or you just have an intuitive or gut response, or your intuition pings about it. But before we dive into that, I'm going to just take us through a little somatic technique that I use, which is a gravity visualization. I like to call it making friends with gravity. So I want you to just take a look at this tree in this picture. And notice the tall, straight trunk reaching up towards the sky and the roots, because the tree is on a boulder, the roots wrapping around the boulder and reaching down to the earth. And then bring your attention to your own body and notice that part of you is uplifted, sitting upright. I'm assuming most of us are sitting. And part of you is settling downwards toward the ground. And just really notice that we are in a constant relationship with gravity. That gravity is an orienting force in the world. It's the force that holds things towards the center of the earth. And it's this force that our bodies and everything else on the earth are built and designed to be in relationship with in a good way. This is also a force that's very trustworthy in that if you drop something, it's always going to fall down towards the ground because gravity is always pulling towards the core. If you trip, you're going to fall down towards the ground. Tripping and falling can be scary, but it can also be a reminder that there's a trustworthy force in this world that we're always in relationship with, even though it's invisibly felt. So really just notice your bum on the chair, your feet on the floor, your hands or forearms or other body parts resting on surfaces. And let yourself feel a little heavier where these body parts are resting on surfaces. And let yourself notice, imagine these invisible threads, ropes, lines of gravity attaching to your body and pulling and holding you towards the center of the earth. And just notice how you start to feel as you bring your awareness into gravity's interaction with your body. So I'm going to slowly read through the rites of passage document, and you're just going to take notes as we go. Rites of passage, or the lack thereof. Rites of passage are supported movement through human developmental stages, and they're characterized by the necessity of community participation. An obvious rite of passage is a wedding. And this movement through human developmental stages, if you think of a wedding, right, it's a change in a person's role or status through a separation from the previous role, a build up towards the change. This is all the preparations and build up towards the ceremony. Movement through the liminal state where you're neither what you were before and you're not yet what you're becoming. So you enter the ceremonial process, and then celebration of your new role and status after the ceremony is the party, right? So what happens nowadays, though, is a lot of rites of passage have disappeared from communities and families. And so there can often be grief that comes up around a lack of a rite of passage, or a rite of passage that doesn't quite make sense that's popped up instead, that represents a developmental stage, but maybe isn't fully celebrated, but is a big deal. An example would be getting a driver's license in your late teens. Okay, so let's just go through these different categories of rites of passage possibilities. Birth, adoption, learning to ride a bike, starting school and or having your first outside the family mentor, puberty and or first menstruation, getting your driver's license, having the kind of talk a member of a marginalized community has to have with their children or young people to teach them to stay safe in the dominant culture, a first kiss and or sex for the first time, coming out as, and fill in the blanks, a first real independent trip away from parents, becoming self-sufficient, for example, earning an income or providing for yourself in some way. graduation ceremonies, religious rites of passage and rituals, for example, the bar and bat mitzvah, baptism, confirmation, etc., pregnancy, miscarriage or infertility or pregnancy loss or stillbirth, childbirth, parenthood, single or solo parenthood, filing your first tax return, marriage or partnership or wedding, becoming a citizen of a new country and or renouncing citizenship, the empty nest phase, no children at home, death of a loved one, funerals, the grieving process, entry into old age, retirement, either voluntary or forcible, menopause or andropause, the next category is moments of decision, experiences that are or have the potential to be life-changing. These are experiences that are under your control by your own choice. A lot of these can also qualify as experiences that are not by your own choice, in which case you might want to make a note of that. But we're focusing here on moments of decision. Leaving home, leaving your hometown, moving to a new town, returning to your hometown, sex with someone new, celibacy, choosing to have a child biologically or via adoption, choosing to become a foster parent, becoming a parent to family members' kids, for example, sibling, cousin, a child's child, choosing to never have children, abortion, placing your child with adoptive family or to the other parent or other family members, switching or transitioning sex or gender, witnessing a birth, changing your name, a marriage proposal or rejection, divorce, becoming a sex worker, leaving a loved one, choosing a spiritual practice, leaving a spiritual practice or community, choosing a course of study in a school, committing to a career, choosing military service, leaving or switching careers, changing your style, sitting with someone dying, for example, hospice, living in a different culture, learning or using a new language, immersing yourself via homestays, immigration by your choice, being a traveler and or going on a journey, ending a friendship, getting sober and or staying sober, choosing a different relationship model, for example, polyamory, polygamy, polygyny, polyandry, etc. Changing economic classes up and or down, choosing to retire, choosing not to retire, finding a sense of place or belonging, first act of rebellion and or encounters with consequence, cultural reclamation, learning ancestral practices, languages, etc., getting a new puppy or kitten or pet. The last category is other pivotal experiences. These are usually out of our control. You might find some of them for you were moments of decision, but here we're focusing on experiences that show up and we have to navigate them. Intense moments of profound connectedness and joy, including in nature. Encounters with the numinous through art or poetry, music or dreams, etc. A spiritual awakening. A Kundalini awakening or rising experience. Transformative or transcendent experiences working with psychedelics and or shamanic healing. Encounters with the void, epiphanies, the holy. Existential crisis, also called dark night of the soul, quarter life crisis, and midlife crisis. The individuation process. Extreme loneliness. Secrets revealed in your family or personal or friendship circle or community, etc. Being a foster child and or having many different caregivers or families. Abandonment, not knowing a parent or parents. Being forced through a pregnancy and having your child removed from you. These were often called homes for unwed mothers. They were family, church, community cover-ups and happened all the way up into the 1980s. Going through a divorce or separation and losing custody of your child. Having your child taken away and put into foster care. Having your child abducted from you. Being reunited with your child. Finding out your child has a lifelong disability. Finding out your partner or spouse has a catastrophic illness. Becoming a caregiver to elderly or infirm parents. A first personal experience of discrimination of some sort, for example, racism, sexism, ableism, homophobia, fat phobia, etc. Witnessing discrimination against others for the first time. Being bullied. Being the bully. Being the bystander. Being a visible minority in the community you live in. Being an immigrant or refugee by circumstance rather than by choice. Being of mixed race or heritage or culture or all three, visibly and or non-visibly. Betrayal. Incarceration. Estrangement. Witnessing someone die. Making peace and or reconciliation. Living through a natural disaster. Chronic illness. Mental illness. Change in accessibility needs. A healing crisis. Cancer. A transformative diagnosis, one that leads to support and healing or insight. Spontaneous healing of an incurable disease or condition. A discovery of rightful vocation. Being diagnosed with PTSD or complex PTSD. Being an abuse survivor. Traumas of various kinds. Being the survivor or child or descendant of survivors of genocide, the Holocaust, Indian residential schools, slavery. ACOA and GCOA, adult, child, or grandchild of an alcoholic. Survivor of a cult. Survivor of, and fill in the blanks. Being a victim of child sex trafficking. Forced into prostitution. Addiction. Changing economic classes, up or down, but not by choice. Being conscripted into military service, including moral injury, for example, harming civilians. Job loss. Being homeless. Living with non-visible disabilities. Coming into unexpected wealth. For example, an inheritance, lottery win, gift, etc. Experiencing fame of some sort. For example, sports, film, entertainment, politics, online, viral, something else. Falling in love. Meeting a soul friend. Meeting a hero. So, I'm just double checking the chat section. We're going to move on to the life story timeline, but I just want to point out this rites of passage document, which you have a link to in the emails that I sent in preparation for this workshop. So you can always refer back to that or through the replay, which is available for the next 6 days. Everything you circled and identified is a story. So you have just generated an immense amount of story and writing prompts for yourself just by going through that list. And what I also want you to do is add those to the life story timeline I'm going to get you to do next. You may or may not have time to do it now, but just make sure everything you identified in the rites of passage document you put into the life story timeline at some point. So we're going to do a similar process to the fairy tale timeline, but this time it's about your own life. You will not have time to finish all of this in 15 minutes, but you will have enough time to get enough down to gain some insight. And I really want you to encourage you to keep going with this because it becomes such a valuable resource for yourself, especially when you get in the weeds of writing your memoirs. So I'm just going to skip to an example I made of my own life story in 15 minutes, again on Canva. So don't stress that your example might not look as fancy. What I want you to also make sure as you start laying out your timeline is that you don't do a really long sprawling sentence that goes from one end of the paper to the other, because what's likely to happen as you continue to work with your timeline is you might have to cut it and add paper to expand space. So you want to keep your notes contained so that it's possible to actually cut and expand the timeline. So again, what I did first was I divided the paper in the middle, and I made a decision about what themes were going above and what themes were going below. This just helps to keep information organized, especially when you're thinking about the volume of information you're putting in. And the setup really determines the outcome. So it's always worth it to take a little bit of extra time to give yourself a system and then dive in. So what I decided to do was put facts, details, and dates up in the bottom half as much as possible, and to put themes, intuitions, body responses, feelings, and questions in the top half of my timeline. And then what I started with was the really big, obvious things in my life, right? It helps to do that. It also helps, especially if you're over 40, to chunk things out by decades, equally spaced, to start, just so you can visually organize. So birth, 1978. I put some symbolic space before my birth to represent my mom's pregnancy, ancestors, all the questions and experience that have shaped me that came before I was born. So I really recommend you just add that symbolic space to represent what you may or may not know, but that exists and has shaped you. And then the here and now, you can see I made this in 2021. So I also left some symbolic space after now to represent the fact that my life will continue. So make sure to do that too. And then I just bopped in and put my birth, another big significant event, high school graduation, giving birth to my daughter, my dad dying of cancer, and the now of 2021. Then I've moved around a lot, and so I color coded my locations because I've gone back and forth to my hometown quite a bit as well. So the Yukon Territory, where I'm from, is this green, and you can see here, 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 and here, and here. I've returned. So, and then other places that I've lived, I've made brackets to show the time frame where I was in these other places, and I added imagery as it pleased me. Then above, themes. So university was a theme, which happened in 3 different cities. Single motherhood was a really big theme of my adulthood, and self-employment, right? So any sort of themes that you can bracket, you're going to pop in. And then color coding is really helpful, by the way, if you get nerdy about that, or using Post-its or something. And then I started going in with these little Post-it notes to add more like specific themes. So, and abiding questions. Who are my people? Where do I come from? That's been a through line my whole life. Also, why do I love the Yukon landscape so much, right? And then childhood themes, siblings, dogs, cats, swimming, Catholic school, cousins, right? So you can just do point form lists of stuff to jog your memory, so on and so forth. So let me just go back one slide. Again, what belongs on your timeline is what I just described. Also, anything from the rites of passage document. From start to finish, pivotal moments, characters, action, like you can add in important people that were really present in your life at different time frames. Colors, details, anything you remember belongs. You do not need to figure out your themes yet. You're just focused on getting these moments down on the timeline so you have this master document. Also, you can add anything you feel an emotional or a somatic response to, things where you like or dislike, or you just jot them down. Any intuitive hits and sensory details and questions and wonderings are really useful. So I can toggle between these two. What I want you to also refrain from doing is referencing back to your fairy tale and trying to figure it out yet. There is no need, and it's also not meant to be literal. We're going to bring it together, but try not to leap ahead to
You
that
totally
point.
busted me, Janelle.
Everybody.
I thought I found a shortcut.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're probably going to wander that way, but this really works better if you can reel yourself back in and just focus on your life story timeline. Okay, so 15 minutes, and if there's any questions right now, just raise your hand. It's better if you speak them. So if you click that raise hand button, you'll catch my attention for sure. And dive in. It's not a lot of time to work on your life story timeline, but you're going to keep going after this workshop.
I just want to say this is excellent and amazing. Like I'm
Oh,
enjoying
yay.
this so much, Janelle. And I'm going to
I'm
leave
so
for 2
glad.
minutes to get a glass of water and tape because I'm going to tape
Perfect.
pages together so I can do this.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Yes.
in case anyone else wants to use tape, and go get
It's a
it.
good idea. Mhm. Okay, there's about a minute left. I'll just get that last detail in, and remember, you're going to return to this and keep building it. Okay, let's move on. We have done your fairy tale timeline, gone through your rites of passage, and started your life story timeline. So what's next? How do we put it all together? This is the integration part of the workshop. You can think of it as braiding timelines together and pattern spotting. So what you'll want to do is have both your fairy tale timeline and your life story timeline side by side or one above the other. Post-it or sticky notes is fun if you have them, but something to make notes about what you're going to notice. And I'm not going to give you a ton of time to do this, just enough time to identify 2 or 3 or 4 themes. But here's what I want you to pay attention to between the two timelines. And again, this does not have to be literal. Sometimes people get tangled up in feeling like the ancient tale must reflect their life or vice versa. That's not what this is about, although sometimes it does happen that way. So on the literal level, between the two stories, your life story, the fairy tale or myth, are there any shared experiences? Shared symbolism? Similar characters? Note that. On the symbolic and cultural level, do these characters or experiences or symbols stand in for other meanings and or experiences? Make note of that. Is there symbolism that has meaning in your culture or cultures, for example, in the story, food, behaviors, or colors? On the personal level, what is your intuition telling you? Where is your attention being pulled? Don't worry if it doesn't make sense. Don't resist if it's contrary to what your ego wants. Sometimes what happens is someone comes into this workshop with a really intense desire to work in a certain decade or with a certain story, and then they do this workshop and they keep being pulled to a different time frame and different themes and really resist that. But I really encourage you, if you're being redirected, to notice and follow that. There's usually a really good reason for it. And it doesn't mean that you're not going to work with what you thought you were going to. It just means maybe your attention is better placed in this area that you hadn't thought of or noticed or have been avoiding. Okay, on the narrative level, out of all the options for you, what is this story actually about? What is your life actually about? And how can you let the ancient tale offer guidance? Other questions to ask yourself: what about these patterns, themes, and storylines most interests you? You have to follow your interest. What personal time frame are you feeling most pulled toward? It doesn't need to make sense. What narrative arcs in the two timelines are the most compelling to you? What are the transformational experiences the characters, especially you, going through? So I'm going to give you a couple case study examples after I give you 5 minutes to work with this pattern spotting that I just talked you through. So 5 minutes, it's not very much time, but it's enough time. So dive in. And if you need me to toggle back and forth, just let me know.
Janelle, would you mind going back to the slide with the questions just for a sec? Thank you so much. Anil, could you go back a slide, please?
You have 1 minute left. Okay, so just let that simmer. And I want to give you a little case study just to demonstrate how this might appear and show up in myself. So I have had a relationship with the Selkie fairy tale for almost 20 years. And that's the thing with these ancient tales is they have their own kind of animating force and life. And the longer we work with these stories that seem sort of simple, the richer they become, and also the richer our self-discovery becomes. The Selkie tale, Seal's human shapeshifters, comes from Celtic Gaelic cultures, Irish and Scottish Highlander, as well as from Orcadian, Scots, Shetland, Faroese, Icelandic, and Norse cultures. Additionally, seal shapeshifters, similar to the Selkie, exist in the folklore of many cultures, including legends from Sweden and the Chinook peoples of the Pacific Northwest of the United States. So what I'm going to do is very quickly tell this story. If you like it and want longer versions, there are many to be found online, including on my podcast. But this is going to be a brief version, and then I'm going to describe the insights I've gained from loving this story. So, once upon a time, perhaps a long time ago, but it could also happen in the here and now, there was a remote village on a rocky shore next to the wild Atlantic Ocean. There were no trees, but there were very hardy people. and they had an intimate relationship with the sea. And it was known that some of the creatures of the sea were these magic seal folk, these shape-shifting people that could take their sealskins off and enter human form as they chose and pleased. And these seal folk were beautiful, uninhibited, joyful. And it was also known that some of the human villagers were descended from the love matches of human and Selkie. No one had seen a Selkie in a very long time, but there was a young fisherman of marriageable age who was smitten with the idea of seal women and refused to marry any of the girls in his village or surrounding villages, even though he was highly sought after for being steady, a good fisherman, a good provider, quiet and thoughtful, and handsome. But he wasn't interested. He kept longing and pining for these mythic seal folk. And as it happened, with his curiosity and his focus, finally he saw them on a hot sunny day with the sun beaming down on a boulder near the shore of the sea. There he saw seals in their clumsy way, propelling themselves from the water up onto the boulder and then shedding their skins and stepping out. And what was it but this glorious gathering of young women, dancing and singing and laughing naked. And so he also knew from the lore that a Selkie would stay in human form if you took their skin. And so he found his way to the edge of that boulder quietly without being seen, and then he found one of the sealskins and he drew it together and tucked it away in a little pocket because it was a magic sealskin and suddenly it was small enough to hide in his pocket. And when the sun started to fade behind the clouds and it became cold, the seal women all put their sealskins back on and dove back into the water, except for one who could not find her sealskin. And he revealed himself and he proposed that they marry, and she countered with, it can only be 7 years because that's as long as I can exist in human form. And he felt that they were a love match and she had no choice but to stay in human form while he had her sealskin. And somehow they became a family, they had children. She enjoyed humans and their strange, strange ways. And she loved her children, and he was a good provider. And there's so many details that are complicated and fraught. But that whole time she was waiting for the 7 years to be up because she longed to return to her home and the saltwater sea and her sisters and her family. And 7 years arrived and she asked for her sealskin back, and somehow he had changed the story and wouldn't give it back to her. In fact, didn't even remember that it existed. In fact, was she actually even a Selkie? In fact, it doesn't matter. She couldn't go back to the sea, and she started to disappear. Her spirit left her, her joy, her energy. Her kids worried, and they got more animated, trying to engage her. And kids, of course, are very curious. And somehow one of them found this strange, ratty object, and maybe it was in a cave and maybe it was above the lintel of the door. And we just don't know. But that kid went to her mom and said, Mom, 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 I found this thing. And her mom knew the second she started to describe it. And fiercely and leaping out of bed in a way that her children hadn't seen in months. And she scared her kid so much. And she said, Where is it? And she ran as fast as she could, and she grabbed that very delicate sealskin. And she went sprinting to the sea, where she plunged it into the water. She was dying to just put it on, but she knew it would break apart if she didn't let it rehydrate. And then she stripped her clothes down, she put the sealskin on, and she dove into the water straight towards her seal sisters with their big liquid eyes just above the level of the water, waiting for her. And then she came up and she looked around and she heard her children, Bob, 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 on the shore of the sea, her children who were half Selkie and half human, but couldn't exist in the sea full time. Nor did they have sealskins. They were powerful swimmers, but they were not Selkie. And that is the end of that version of a Selkie tale. So, if we take that tale and then we look at some of the themes for me, they're not going to be the same as for you, but for me, when I started to first work with that story, which I'd known pretty much my whole life, but was really introduced to the beauty of engaging with a story and all of these themes through Clarissa Pinkola Estace's book, Women Who Run with the Wolves, which is a Jungian analytical approach to fairy tales. Some of the obvious themes at first that showed up were sisterhood and relationships with women and friendship, coercion, marriage, culture shock, motherhood, betrayal, and a return home. So you can see right there, I have a number of super juicy stories that I could work with that were revealed as being a big deal through the Selkie story. As I continued to stay with the story and work with it, unseen hidden themes for me, again, this is for me, it might not be for you, but had to do with especially Clarissa Pinkola Estace's examination of the sealskin as a representation of the soul, of the true self. And so a further theme was of self-reclamation, of reclaiming myself, shedding my shyness, learning how to manage my sensitivity, being embodied, right? Also kinship, coming to terms with ancestry and lineage. Also, you know, of course, you'd think this would be obvious, but a pattern of trusting men who made promises they didn't keep, then breaking that cycle. Also, later, much, much later, the role of loneliness in my life, especially when I was super shy. And just in the past couple years, oh, I'm really interested in the fisherman and what his loneliness and longing and the role of being the coercer, having that little bit of power that you almost make yourself forget you hold, but that gives you enough power to coerce and bend things in the way that you want things to go rather than in the way that everyone wants. And how do I do that in my life, right? Juicy, juicy. So I hope that helps give you a little bit of an idea of how this works for yourself. Let me just double check. Okay, so I am going to zip past this second one. We have one more writing prompt, because I did promise an outline. So I'm going to give you 2 examples, and then I'm going to give you 3 minutes. Now that you've done all this generative work, stirring up and surfacing themes and ideas, write a swift description of an overarching story and events, no more than 2 to 3 sentences and only in 3 minutes. So I'll give you 2 of my examples and then I'm going to set the timer for you. So example description number 1, imagined as a memoir in essay or book format. Janelle graduates high school and leaves her northern home for Japan, Russia, and 3 different Canadian cities. Lonely and overwhelmed, she doesn't realize she's been managing her sensitivity in isolating ways until she becomes pregnant at 23. Just come home, her parents tell her, and she does, returning to live with them, embarking on single motherhood and a path of healing alongside her baby daughter. So you can see this little formula right at the bottom through which I created this outline. The protagonist, other characters, a precipitating event, which was the unexpected pregnancy, and emotion, heartbreak, because the relationship didn't work, which incites an action or movement, which was returning home and embarking on single motherhood. I'm going to give you one more example. This one is a short story, memoir in essay format. 12-year-old Janelle finds out her parents are giving her beloved dog Key to a new home. Heartbroken, she sneaks herself and her 3 younger siblings out to the doghouse to spend a last night with their 2 dogs. They snuggle, but, cramped together and too cold, eventually sneak back into the house before morning. So you can see how this works for a bigger story and a smaller, cuter story. So, and again, here's the formula at the bottom, and I am setting the timer now, and you have 3 minutes to do this. You can do this many times after this workshop. Just choose one option to do this now. 3 minutes starting now. Okay. So this becomes a framework by which when you are confused about whether some part of your life story belongs in the story, you can refer back to this very quick outline. Is it in service to this story arc or not? And then it helps you discern whether to bring it in or set it aside. Okay, so a couple more fun details, because a lot of writers are also visual artists or creatives in other ways. And I presented this to some art quilters once and came up with this added element. So playing with visual elements from your timelines. Look what I did with the Cinderella timeline and this wave of ups and downs. I went over it and I found this pattern. And then suddenly I have this visual pattern that represents the movement of the story in the way that I designed it. Same with my life story timeline. And of course, you can do this many times and you'll come up with different visual elements. But just to give you an example, I took the brackets of where I'd lived and I flattened them like this. And then um, I just played with zigzags and squiggles with these upper elements and put them together. And I would probably rework this a little more, but it's just some creative play outside of words that you can engage in to bump yourself further into the creative process. And, I have students that do graphic memoir. I have students that do diary quilts. I have students that maybe they want a little representative tattoo of a thing that no one understands but themselves. There's lots of ways you can play with meaning making that don't have to make meaning for anyone but yourself. So, just to recap, today you learned how to discover themes for your memoir using your favorite ancient tale, how to make a life story timeline using the rites of passage document, pattern spot, and braid the timelines all together into an outline. You learned why timelines are useful and ancient tales like fairy tales are super helpful, and that it's possible to organize your life story into themes, it's possible to pattern spot, and it's possible to feel supported in your memoir writing process. I'm going to make 2 invitations now, actually. The first is share your 3-sentence outline in the chat section if you want. If you want, kind of fun to read each other's. While I also tell you about my transformational memoir writing course and offer you an invitation with a great discount just for Nicole's community. So, the art of personal myth making, write your memoirs, reclaim yourself. This is my work. And you showed up for this workshop because you're interested in bridging the gap between wanting to write your memoir and actually writing it, right? You've sensed that writing your memoir will be healing and will transform you. And you've wanted support in organizing your stories and writing the more difficult ones. I also know that if you are in my ecosystem of work, you love stories, and stories carry their own magic and medicine. I also suspect you felt hungry for transformation and growth, that you're ready to make a change and receive support to help you work through resistance, actually get the first draft of your memoir written. Every time I present, I catch typos, but then I never see them again. Actually get the first draft of your memoir written, all while healing in the process. So now is your time to write your life stories, reconnect with your body, and reclaim yourself with the guidance of my step-by-step process. I really want to emphasize that nothing I've shared with you today is out of your reach, and this workshop is the hands-on foundation I start everyone with in order to tap into your mythic selves, organize your life stories into a memoir outline, get your writing started and or wrangled, and embark on a creative healing process. It is very possible to do your memoir writing and healing in a solitary way. And also, when it's possible, I recommend that we not be alone in this work. So the way to not be alone in this work with me is with my course, The Art of Personal Myth Making. My students say it better than me. So Molly Pennington shares, when I started Janelle's personal myth-making course, I'd been working on my memoir for years, but in a practical sense, I was getting nowhere. By the time the course finished, I had a complete outline, 3 full chapters in the start of my book proposal. It's really important that I let you know, I don't teach book proposal writing or chapter writing, but the course itself was such a catalyst that she dove into all of that. Not everyone wants to write and publish their memoir, and Jess Molnar is a visual artist and an example of that. She just loves healing and writing. So she shared, personal myth-making was the closest thing that I had to a vacation in close to a decade. Before taking this class, I had some major chips on my shoulder, and I felt resigned to lug these things around with me for the rest of my life. Janelle's class offered a fun, safe, and creative way to reframe my troubling stories. Taking this class was the nicest gift that I ever gave myself. So The Art of Personal Myth-Making is a 13-module online course where you'll write the first draft of your memoir, heal your relationship to your life story, and reconnect to your body. Inside those 13 modules are writing resources to keep you organized, more than 100 writing prompts to guide your writing process, including somatic healing techniques, video and audio training for body-based healing and unblocking creativity, an online peer-led community to help cheer each other on, live monthly group coaching calls with myself, and lifetime access to the above. You also have the option to upgrade into the live course, which I teach once per year at 6 months with weekly calls. And sometimes, sometimes that's nicer, but self-directed with support is also nice. By the end of our time together, you'll have your body as your most trusted creative advisor, have cultivated a deep relationship with a chosen ancient tale, finally have the rough draft of your memoir written if you do everything. That's important to note. Have plenty of self-care healing tools for creative block and resistance. You'll be writing regularly and full of grounded enthusiasm. So the 13 modules are divided into 4 phases, which I'm just going to take you through. The bones of your life story, where we explore mapping your life story. This workshop is part of that beginning point. The stories and lies we tell ourselves, ancestors, lineage, and family mythology. Then we move into kind of the connective tissue of your life story, stories related to food and culture, place and space, and body. The nervous and circulatory systems of your life story, these energizing connection and disconnection points that include fury, envy, and judgment, idols, heroes, and goddesses, and ideas of beauty and attractiveness. And organs of your life story, where we explore villainy, language and the senses, longings and expectations, and celebrating the storyteller and writer within. How are you going to share your stories, for example? So this course is most definitely about healing and transformation. It's sourced through the body, writing, and story. It's a generative, expansive, and unexpected experience. And it's a process of delight by engaging with body, fairy tales, myth, and personal myth making. It's getting up to the first draft of your memoir written. This course is not about only writing and ignoring your body and healing needs. This is not a path to publishing. It's an up to the first draft stage with plenty of space for healing as you write. This course is not at all boring, and it is not a specifically craft of writing or critiquing course. There's many great teachers offering that, so I don't need to, but there's very few teachers with a focus on embodied writing, healing, and highly skilled somatic healing training and personal myth making. So that's where I specialize. If you choose to take my course and sign up in the next 6 days, I have a painful bonus of my Honoring Your Anger and Honoring Your Grief courses. They're self-directed, and when we work with healing in our life stories, anger and grief come up. So this is a very useful add-on. And especially for this community, I have a coupon for an extra 20% off the tuition for the next 6 days, which is Nicole's last name, right? So everything that I mentioned is what you get in the Art of Personal Myth Making. I'm not going to go through that again, but the cost is, oh, I forgot to update this. Anyways, the cost is 20% off of 1,925, I think, which ends up being this price right here. So the cost, the true cost with the coupon is reflected in the slide, even though I've raised my rates slightly since I made this. So you can pull up that page with this QR code. Make sure you use the coupon code, and I will also be emailing you with the replay soon with a reminder of the coupon code and some helpful little emails with suggestions related to memoir writing and healing over the next 6 days. I think that's the end of this slide. Oh, I have frequently asked questions. Haha. Okay, I'll go through these quickly. The core ones that most people have questions about are useful to cover. I'm afraid to dig up old trauma and relive those moments and emotions. What if I re-traumatize myself? What if I fall apart? This is a very real concern, and if you've found yourself stuck or stopped, it's actually good to know that part of your psyche is protecting you from being overwhelmed. And this is why I do the work that I do and have such extensive training in somatic healing, including nervous system trauma resolution and regulation. So I provide a ton of support around being gentle and also not diving into the center of your trauma, but working around the periphery where there's a lot of really great stories, actually, and kind of gently thawing the big thing until you're able to work with it without being overwhelmed. There's a lot of value in going slow and a lot of great stories you would otherwise miss if you went too fast. I'll just zip through. Sometimes people wonder if their writing is bad and they have a boring life story, to which I say, who cares if your writing is bad, and also who says so? And you get better by doing it, so just keep writing. And no story is boring if you master the art of good storytelling. You can tell an amazing story about eating a bowl of rice if you are a good storyteller. So the only reason for being boring is not knowing how to craft a story. And a very dramatic story can actually be quite boring if the person doesn't know how to spin a tale. So these are all art forms that you can get good at just by trying. This is another big one. If I write about my life and share it, will I hurt the people I love? You might. It is true. But what I recommend up to the first draft stage actually is don't tell people you're writing about your life, because they might get worried or upset or assume things. Just keep it private and keep it for you only. You don't have to make a decision about whether you share it or not at this stage. Once you get your first draft done, and then you revisit the question, do I want to publish? Do I want to share? Then the ethical questions related to other people are good to revisit, but you can actually stop yourself before you've even started by worrying about this too soon. And your story is about you, and so just keep other people out of it. That's my best recommendation. Here's another good question. You're a white, straight, midlife, able-bodied woman. I'm not. How do I know I'll be safe in your communities and care? So I recommend you, if you have, especially if you have a marginalized identity, that you do ask these questions of your teachers. And my commitment is to continually do anti-bias work and prioritize not the mainstream of my group, but everyone, and especially people on the periphery. And I also have a commitment not so much to creating safe spaces as spaces with a culture of repair. So when mistakes happen, when there is rupture, which is inevitable, that I have the skills and commitment to repair what comes up. Let's see. Boop, 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 boop. There we go. Okay. So, woof. How'd it go, everyone? We have a bit of time for questions and or shares.
Thanks to you, I cannot stop writing.
Ah, great.
I've had some amazing connections that I haven't made before that are going to help me with all my writing. So thank you, Janelle.
Oh, what a pleasure to hear. Was there anything specific with the ancient tale that was helpful and surprising?
For me,
Mm-hmm.
I already knew that I wanted to write the Isis and Osiris myth as the frame for my story, but it was the timeline starting with the birth that connected me to a later loss and became the theme of my whole life. And I didn't make that
Mm,
connection before.
okay. Very
Hmm.
cool.
Yeah.
So if anyone else wants to share or has a question, just click that raise hand button, which is right in the menu bar at the bottom.
I'd also just like to say, Janelle, that this is the most in-depth, meaty, juicy free training I have ever been to. It was so generous. So
Thanks.
generous.
It's I mean, I've been told it should be a paid course, and actually I might start charging for it. So,
Mhm.
but right now it's still free. It's fun, and it's been developed just by playing with presenting it and seeing what resonates for people.
Your passion for it is really obvious. It's really
Oh,
evident
good.
in all of the depth. So thank you so much.
Well, my beautiful people, as usual, we've got a bunch of introverts waiting for someone else to chime in, which means we'll end this call unless whatever like thing you're hoping someone else says comes from you. So this is
Right.
the last call to raise your hand. And there we go, Danette.
Danette. Hello,
Did I
lovely.
unmute myself? Can you hear me?
You
You
did, you did.
Okay,
did.
good. Okay. I just want to say too, I feel I'm grateful for your work. I'm all of the, as a fellow introvert, all the energy it takes to present. I get it. I'm getting a little winded just asking a question. So thank you very much. But I want to say that your work really feels like it drew me in a kind of a spiritual way. Like, and it was just the
Hmm.
timing. So I don't know if you can see behind me. I have placed a piece of
Yep.
craft paper back there to write my timeline. This whole week I've been spending writing on an essay on my grandfather, who had a piece of craft paper on his office wall, a timeline of the book of Revelation. So my whole mythology and my folklore is about spirituality and what gets passed on and why. It just, yeah. So it's a French Canadian folklore myth that I use, the loup-garou, which is the werewolf who is cursed to
Mm.
transform into a dark figure if he disobeys the religious cultural norms, if he sins, if he doesn't go to church for more than misses 5 churches in a month or something, or in a couple of weeks or whatever. So it was fascinating, like all the weaving together. I know I'm going to be writing for a very long time. So I'm very, very grateful. This has just been very inspirational.
Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you for sharing too.
Thanks, Jeanette. I'm excited for you. I love seeing that behind you on your purple wall.
Anyone else?
Oh,
Erin, let's see.
speculative memoir.
Yeah, there's some shoot, I can't remember the name of her memoir right now, but Sophia Samatar, I can remember her name, uh,
Mm.
wrote a memoir which just brings the imagined monsters into real life in the story. So I think that's marvelous to play with, um, honoring imagination as real, especially as a child, or honoring the parts of you that see ghosts or spirits or elements that are often unseen or unheard, but might be very real for you, to just make it real in your story. Who
Hmm.
cares what other people think? Truly, it's your
Well, I
story.
did for too long. I
Yeah.
have ghosts in my story, and that was actually one of the reasons that it was stalled for so long, was because I cared too much
Oh,
about
interesting.
how it would land.
Mm,
Can you spell the name of the author? Samatar is her last name?
yeah, Sophia Samatar. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Thanks, Janelle. Great
Mm-hmm.
question.
Mm-hmm. Anything else?
I just want to invite anyone who wants to show their appreciation to flood the chat with hearts for Janelle, for all the time, for this incredible, intimate sharing. I just love your work so much, Janelle.
Oh, thanks.
Thanks for spending your morning with us. Or is it morning where you are? It's your afternoon
It's
in
almost
France,
8
isn't
p.m.
it?
evening.
Okay, my morning. A Nicole
Yeah.
centric. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So let this cook away. Keep working with your timelines. Enjoy. If you choose to work with me in my course, I'll be absolutely thrilled. But if not, you can keep going.
Absolutely. And I'm sure we'll do this again. Janelle and I
Yeah.
connect every year or so to do some collaborative workshop
Yeah,
events.
we do.
So yeah, we'll see Janelle again.
All right.
Oh, Marianne has a question. Can I
Oh,
speak?
okay.
Hi, Marianne.
Oh, I think I can speak now. You can hear
You're
me?
There
unmuted.
you are.
Okay, thank you. I just want to say thank you very much. This has been such a help. It's a different way to approach writing, and I certainly welcome that. I also want to say, I really appreciate, Janelle, the framework that you provide today, this kind of entry point into what can be at times very tough tellings, right?
Mhm.
And difficult at times, difficult material, and you've provided a really great way in. I also want to say, yes, it's about our participant material and us, sure. But we're also writing about more universal ideas and themes and occurrences, right? So I think in some
Mhm.
ways this has been so helpful with that. Because we all have commonalities, right? And I think one of the most insightful for me was when you spoke about your own experiences in providing an example about how you work with your own material with regard to like Selkie, right? And the story that you shared. And I thought, how profound, right? How profound, right? So that was a great, it was a great hearing you speak live, right? Hearing from you directly, and then also seeing how you've worked with your material and the mythology that you've chosen to go with. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I'm so glad you got so much out of it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marianne.
Sure.
Okay. Bye, everyone.